Happy New Year. We finally got snow in California, so I figured why not come up here and get some shots. Bring in the new year with some snow. But that's not what this vlog's about. We're gonna cover a 2-day extravaganza at Morongo that I'm starting today. Today's Saturday, January 4th. And I'm gonna head to Morongo right now because this weekend in particular, they have splash pots, both Saturday and Sunday for the NFL games. So they're gonna do $25 every field goal, $50 every touchdown, and $100 every safety, although obviously those don't happen too often, but it's for every table, so it's a pretty good value. And not only that, but it makes the games just much more fun. Like, people go nuts for these splash pots, and there's just more money on the table overall. More people show up. It's just a good time to play, I think. So I'm gonna head over there today, spend the night, and play again tomorrow, Sunday, and of course bring you guys along for the ride. Hopefully it's a good weekend because I'm gonna put in a good amount of hours. And yeah, I think that's it for now. So let's head over and see what happens. All right, so just got to Morongo. I ordered a new debit card yesterday, and until it gets here, my current card is locked out, so I have no ATM access. So I brought $1,800 with me in cash, so that's gotta last the whole weekend. The buy-in here is 500 caps, so a little over 3 buy-ins. Hopefully things don't go terribly, otherwise I might end up here at China Shore's Great Stacks. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. Let's see how it goes. They're about to open at 2-5. Let's get it. All right, for the sake of keeping this video at a normal length, I'm gonna go through these hands a little bit quicker than I normally do, just because there's quite a lot of hands today, and if I went into detail on all of them, this video would be like 45 minutes or something. Anyway, in this first hand, we see an open from middle position for $20. Folds to me in the big blind, and I look down at ace, deuce of hearts. I decide to call, and we see the flop heads up, which comes down king, king, 10 with 1 heart. I check, and he puts out a bet of $20. I think I could still have the best hand often enough to make the call here, especially with a heart out there, so I decide to call, and we see a king of diamonds on the turn, so now the board has 3 kings. I decide to check one more time, and he puts out a bet of $40. This bet was a bit confusing to me because I expected ace high to check back pretty often, and if he had a full house, I'd expect him to size up a little bit, so not really sure what to make of it, but as I said, this player is pretty unorthodox, so I think I could still have the best hand often enough to continue once again, which is what I do, and we see a 4 of spades river card. I check for a 3rd time, and my opponent quickly checks back and shows down a hand that I didn't really expect to see, ace 4 offsuit. In the second hand, the straddle is on, and there's 2 limpers in early position. Action folds to me on the button, and I raise it up to $60 with ace-king offsuit. Both of the limpers make the call, so 3 ways in position to a flop, which we completely miss. It's 10-7-2 with 3 hearts out there. When the action checks to me, this isn't a board that I want to continue barreling on, so I just check it back, and we see a turn 3-way still, which is the 7 of clubs. The first player checks it once again, but this time the second player shoves all in for $90. This player in particular had been losing quite a bit already in the short amount of time that the game had been running, so when the action's on me, I don't necessarily think that we're beat here. There's a lot of random draws he could be doing this with, just because he sensed weakness once we check back the flop. His all-in is for $90, and with $180 already in the pot, we're getting a 3-to-1 ratio to call here, which means we only have to have the best hand 25% of the time to make this a profitable spot. The small consideration here is the player still left to act, so before making any decision, I kind of look at her for a little bit, try not to be too obvious, and she seems pretty disinterested in the hand at this point, so I kind of just shrug and call, expecting to be good at least some percentage of the time here. And sure enough, that's what ends up happening. The first player indeed folds. The river rolls off a 5 of hearts, which isn't necessarily a great card at all, but the all-in player doesn't seem to want to show and just kind of shakes his head. So I turn over ace high, and sure enough, that's the winner.
Yeah, you had to go.
In this third hand, I'm in the straddle for $10. The under the gun player limps in on my left. The button limps, the big blind completes, and I decide to check my option with king 5 of hearts. The flop comes down pretty great for this exact hand. It's 7-6-4 with 2 hearts, so we have an open-ended straight draw and the second nut flush draw. I check it. The under the gun player bets $25. The button makes the call and the small blind makes the call. I don't really like my play here. I decided to just make the call because at the time I was thinking the player on my left had been playing fairly tight, and I'd actually played with him before and he's always been really tight. So I took this bet to indicate a pretty strong hand, but with how much equity we have and considering that there's dead money in the button and small blind calling, I think a check raise here is much better to apply max pressure on this player on my left. And even if he does have like top set or something, we're never going to be in terrible shape. Anyway, as played, I decide to call, and we see the turn, which is the queen of diamonds. I check it. The under the gun player bets $85, and then the action folds back to me this time. This is the problem with not check raising the flop. He only has $100 behind, so with absolutely no fold equity, now there really is no play but to just call and hope we make our hand, which is what I do. I put in the 85, which is slightly annoying. The river comes the 10 of diamonds, so we miss everything. I check it. He goes all in for his last 100, and I just make the fold. Pretty irritated with how I played this hand. Check raising the flop just seems much better, but oh well. On to the next one.
And a B is 4%.
Next hand seems much more difficult to mess up. The straddle is on, and I look down at ace king offsuit, open it up to $35. I see a call on my direct left, and then the button makes it $135. Action folds back to me. I started the hand with around 500, and considering that this is a 2-5-10 hand, I essentially just have 50 big blinds, so really a no-brainer to get it all in here. Not looking to call and let this player on my left in for a cheaper price, and also playing ace king out of position isn't necessarily too exciting, so I decide to move in for 500. The player on my left folds, but the button doesn't think too long before making the call, so I'm all in with ace king, probably looking for some help, although I expect to have the best hand sometimes. It'd be nice to hit an ace or a king. Unfortunately, that does not happen. Comes all low cards, but luckily we end up tying versus ace king offsuit. Chop it up. A little while later, I look down at ace queen offsuit, first to act. I raise it up to $20 and see a call from the player on my left and the small blind. So 3 ways to a flop of king, queen, 9, rainbow. The action checks all the way around, and we see a 5 of clubs turn card. This time the small blind bets $20, with second pair not going anywhere just yet, so I make the call, and the player on my left makes the call as well. River comes the 9 of hearts, and this time the small blind bets $25. Seems like a really weak bet to me. Unfortunately, some of the weak hands that she could be betting this way do include kings that obviously beat my hand, so even though I think I'm ahead a good amount of the time, I decide to just raise it up and turn my hand into a bluff, and that way win the pot outright, whether she has a weak king or a hand that I'm already ahead of. This isn't a play that I'd make against stronger opposition, but in this exact scenario, the player on my left I don't think will ever improve on this river card. Seems like he's mostly just drawing to me, so I'm not too worried about him. And the small blind, like I said, I think we're ahead of, but sometimes could be behind. So I decide to just win the pot outright with brute force and hope that it works out, which in this case, it does. They both fold and we take it down. The very next hand, I look down at pocket aces in the big blind. Even better news is that there's an open to $25 in the cutoff and a call on the button. One of the best sights in Hold'em, having pocket aces and action ahead. I decide to raise it up to $80. The cutoff makes the call and the button makes the fold. The cutoff only has around 180 behind, so pretty much a pot-sized bet. There's really no flops that I'm going to be folding on, so when it comes down 7-7 deuce, I decide to check it and lay the trap because this guy had been pretty aggressive. So I expect him to shove a lot of hands that he would otherwise fold if I bet myself, which is exactly what ends up happening in this case. I check it and he moves in for 180. I quickly make the call. Turn comes the 3 of spades, river's the queen of clubs. I show my hand, but unfortunately this time, aces are getting cracked. My opponent shows 5-3 of clubs for a flush. Unfortunate run out. We'll get him next time. 5 minutes later, the poker gods decide to have a little fun and give me another try, which is why I get pocket aces once again. Open it up to $20 from under the gun and get called by the player on my left, the small blind, and the big blind. So 4 ways to a flop this time, which comes down king, queen, 9 with 2 diamonds out there. When action checks to me, this isn't a board that I want to down bet at all. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a lot of draws out there, so I expect to get action from at least one of these opponents. So I make it $75. The player on my left folds, the small blind folds, and the big blind check raises to $300. At this point, I only have around 600 behind, so it's really just an all-in or fold spot. I think there's plenty of semi-bluffs in my opponent's range here, so I decided to just go with it. I move all in, and he quickly makes the call. Turn comes the 6 of clubs and the river is the 3 of clubs. I announce one pair and he says that we're good, so I show it and we take it down. At this point, I pick up pretty much no cards for a few hours. Until finally, there's an under the gun limp and the action folds to me in the small blind. I look down at ace king of hearts. I raise it up to $25 and the player on my left 3 bets to $60. The limper folds and the action's back to me. On paper, ace king suited can certainly be a 4 bet. It's never going to be a mistake to make that play, I think. But a few factors here are that 1, I have a really tight image at this point, and 2, the player on my left himself is a pretty tight player. So when he puts in this raise, I don't think he's doing this light at all. So I decided to choose the lower variance route and take it to the streets with a call. The flop comes down king 9-4. Rainbow, obviously a great flop for our hand, especially since we're somewhat under-repped after just calling pre-flop. I check it to the razor and he quickly checks it back. Turn comes the 8 of spades. I think betting is fine, but checking seems good also to continue to under-rep our hand and potentially let him value bet a hand like queens or jacks in this spot. This time that's what I decide to do. I get a little sneaky and check it once again, and he puts out a bet to the tune of $75. Obviously not doing anything here other than making the call, which is what I do. The river comes a really interesting card. It's the ace of spades, so it completes the backdoor flush and improves our hand to top 2 pairs. I gotta be honest, this card in particular kind of threw me for a loop because if I had any bluffs in this spot, I would be using backdoor spades to represent a flush. And to balance with those bluffs, I feel like I should be leading with value hands as well. I'm not sure if that logic is correct, but in my head, if I did pick up like an open-ender on the turn with Jack 10 suited or possibly 6-7 suited or something like that, I would have an idea of leading the river when I make my hand and also when I can represent the flush. So to balance those plays with not just bluffs, I feel like I should be leading with strong hands as well. So that's what I do this time to the tune of $200. He thinks for a while, doesn't really know what to do, but eventually folds. I'm not in love with the river bet. I think I should still be check calling actually, but I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that one. I think that's probably one of the more interesting spots in this vlog. The next hand will cover the first splash pot of the day, which was a $25 field goal splash pot. The under the gun player limps in, and then the player next to act makes it $15. When the action gets to me in the big blind, I look down at ace 3 offsuit, and honestly wouldn't hate turning this into a bluff. We have removal to strong hands just because we have an ace, but the problem with that is people tend to have way more trust issues during splash pots because a lot of players try to just steal it pre-flop. So I decided to just make the call and navigate post-flop. So 3 ways to a flop of 8, deuce, 3 with 2 clubs out there. I check it and the action checks around. Turn comes a 5 of spades. I decided to put out a protection bet here. I think we could have the best hand often enough to put out a bet here, and I don't really want to give a free river card. Obviously, we'll be getting called by better hands sometimes, but there's a lot of draws out there, so I decided to bet 30 and only get called by the under the gun player. So heads up to a river, which is the queen of hearts. I decided to check it with the intention of calling most bets because I don't think she could have a lot of hands that call the turn and suddenly want to value bet this river card. So when she puts out a bet of $50, I don't think too long. I don't really love her sizing here because I'd expect her to go bigger with a bluff, but on the other side of that is a really good price to call here. We only have to be good like 1 out of a million times or something. So I make the call and somehow she has a worse 3. I'm not really sure what her river bet is about, but happy to take down the first splash pot of the day. In this next hand, the straddle's on. There's 2 limpers in early position, and I raise it to $55 on the button with ace queen of diamonds. Only the first limper makes the call, so heads up in position to a flop of king 10-10 with 2 diamonds. So yeah, a royal flush draw. My opponent checks it, and I think you can go either way between checking back and betting here. This time I decide to bet $65, and he quickly makes the call. Turn comes a 9 of hearts, and a bit surprisingly, or actually very surprisingly, he leads for $230 with only 200 behind. Given who this exact player is, some of you may know him as OMC. I'm going to be honest, I think we're drawing to 1 out here, guys. I mean, on a paired board on which we hold the nut flush draw, what bluffs does he even have here? Queen Jack makes a straight. There's a bunch of full houses he could have. I don't think too long and just decide to fold. Don't want to get stubborn even though we do have such a pretty looking draw. Never pay off nits, guys. Never.
Happy New Year's.
And the last hand of the session is a $50 touchdown splash pot. There's a straddle on and the under the gun player opens to $35. There's 4 callers before the action gets to me in the small blind, and I look down at ace 6 of spades. Now I know what you're thinking. Let's just call. This hand is super playable. Let's flop something good and go from there. But how about a little bit of variance on a Saturday night? Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad, right? So I decided to raise it up to $225. With all this dead money out there and the splash pot money, plenty of incentive to take it down here pre-flop, and even if we get called, it's not the end of the world. Unfortunately, we get called by the one guy I'd probably not want to get called by, which is the same player from last hand, who I think is a fairly straightforward and very tight player. He only has around 500 behind now, so there's not going to be a lot of room to maneuver after the flop. However, nothing to worry about. I'm instantly rewarded for my amazing play when the flop comes down ace, ace, 6, rainbow. Just kidding. It's Jack 10-5 with no spade. This is a board where I'm just going to give up on. I don't have any backdoor equity whatsoever. I decide to check. He doesn't even go all in. He bets 200, which is even more terrifying. And I just throw my cards back in the muck. So after that beautiful ending to the night, I decide to rack up, go get some sleep, and come back tomorrow with a bit more rest. pretty sweet pool area they got here at Morongo. If anyone out there has any free rooms for staying here, shoot them this way. Anyway, last night was pretty crazy as you guys saw, but luckily things worked out for me. Ended up winning around 600 in I think like 8 hours or so. All things considered, a pretty good result. Hopefully today the games are as good as they were yesterday. Unfortunately, the splash pot starts at 1 p.m. today as opposed to the 5 p.m. time that it was yesterday. It's just an earlier game, so I don't expect there to be as many people here or as much action just due to the nature of the time of day. Right now there's not even a 2-5. I just got on the board and I think there's like 6 other players and it's 10:30 in the morning. So hopefully the next thing you see is some cards in the air and some hands going our way again. Let's see how Sunday goes. Okay, so right back to it. I picked up quite a bit of hands early on in this session, but unfortunately no action for the first few hours until finally the first interesting hand came up when I looked down at ace queen of clubs in the hijack. There's a limp from early position. I raise it to $25 and then the big blind re-raises to $85. I'm never folding here, so it's between a call or a 4-bet. The problem with 4-bet bluffing is we're just not deep enough. We have around 500 or 550 effective, so if he does make the call, there's not going to be any room for maneuverability after the flop. So I'm going to save those 4-bet bluffs for when someone wants to back me for 50, 100 no limit. Feel free to send me an email, but I decided to just make the call this time and play in position. The flop comes down 10-6-5 with 1 club. He checks it and I decide to check it back. The turn's the 10 of spades pairing the top card. He checks it once again, and I don't hate putting in a bet here, but I think we could still have a strong enough hand to not necessarily start bluffing. My opponent in this case is a very strong player who is capable of 3-betting with ace-jack, ace-10 suited, maybe even smaller aces, so I think we could be ahead a good amount of the time, and for that reason I decided to just check back and try to get to showdown. However, when the river brings a 5 of clubs, and he checks it for a 3rd time, I decide to change my course of action because I feel like we'll be chopping so often that I want to make him fold so that we can scoop the whole pot instead of chopping it. It's hard for me to represent anything with the way the hands played out so far, so I want to go big enough that he gets a bad price even though he knows I'll have ace high more often than not. So I elect on a sizing of $240. He thinks for a minute or two, but eventually lets it go, and I'm pretty sure we take it down versus what would have been a split pot. A little while later, I get dealt pocket jacks in early middle position. There's an under the gun limper. I raise it up to $25. The cutoff makes the call and the limper makes the call. So 3 ways to a flop of 7, 6 deuce, 1 diamond, 2 hearts. The limper checks and I'm definitely going to be betting here, so I put in a bet of $45. A bit surprisingly, the cutoff raises really small. He makes it 100, and then the limper thinks for a while and goes all in for 105. I decide to make the call, and the cutoff obviously calls as well for an extra $5. Turns the 5 of hearts, and I expect this to slow down the action quite a bit. I check it and the cutoff indeed checks it back. When the river comes to deuce of diamonds, I think I want to put in a small value bet here. Obviously, I'm never going to be bluffing into a dry side pot because I have to win versus the all-in player anyway. But I think there's enough worse hands to get called by here that raise the flop, like a 7. Sometimes people raise top pair just to see where they're at, especially for such small sizing. And also some strangely played over pairs like pocket 8s, pocket 9s, and pocket 10s. I'm fully aware that sometimes I'll get called by a better hand, even though I was value betting, but I think that's a good thing. For the most part, you should be getting called by worse hands, but once in a while, if you're getting called by a better hand, I think that's a good indication that you're going for value in a lot of spots that most people wouldn't. All that being said, I put in a bet of $120, and the cutoff pretty much snap calls and ends up having pocket queens. And then the limper has 9-8 of spades, which obviously turns a straight. So I end up losing to both players, but I'm actually pretty okay with how I played this one. In the last hand we'll go over today, there's a limper in early position. The player next to act makes it $25. The cutoff makes the call, and I look down at pocket queens from the small blind. Certainly going to be putting in a raise here, so I make it $85. The limper makes the fold, and then the original raiser goes all in for $480. Action folds back to me, and this is one of those gross spots in poker where you're not sure if you're up against ace-king or a bigger pair. Maybe he could be losing his mind with pocket jacks, but that seems optimistic. We only have 100 big blinds, and folding pocket queens for less than that is pretty difficult, I think. Another consideration is that this exact player and I had been battling pretty hard throughout the day, so ranges could be slightly wider than they otherwise would be, but it's really not a huge factor, just something that's in the back of my mind. After a while, I decide I'm not folding a hand this strong for only 100 bigs, so I put the money in, and unfortunately this time we're up against pocket aces. So we're looking for some help here. We're still like 20% or so to win this hand, but sadly this is not one of those times, and we lose a pretty big one there. Kind of sucks because this was right around the time I had to get going, so unfortunately ended the session on a pretty sour note. Rough day today. Nothing really went my way, and it all kind of topped off near the end there with queens into aces. I wonder if I could just get away from it, but with 100 big blind stacks and against one of the few players capable of sticking it in without just pocket aces, I think it's a pretty tough fold, but I don't know. I think a fold is actually fine. Anyway, the results. Lost, I think, around 900 in like 4 hours or so. Unfortunately couldn't stay, even though the game was pretty good, and the splash pots aren't over because there's a family event I gotta get to for my sister's birthday. So gotta get out of here. Ended up booking a loss over this weekend. Won yesterday, but gave it all back today and then some. So hopefully things turn around. It's been kind of break even over the past couple of weeks or so. So just part of variance, I guess. But anyway, I think that's gonna do it for this vlog. As always, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for all the support. Thanks for tuning in. If you made it this far, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up on the video because it takes quite a while to edit these multi-day ones. Oh, before I forget, this Friday is the meetup game at the Gardens with Andrew Nemi and Brad Owen. So if you guys want to come out and play, join me and those guys in some 5-5 no limit. I'll be there on Friday. And then on Saturday, they have a tournament, which I will not be able to make it to, but I will be there on Friday. So again, if anyone wants to meet up, come say hi. That'll be the place to do it. Okay, that's a wrap. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Peace.